You sit in the quiet of your room, perhaps in the early hours of morning when the world feels suspended between yesterday and today, and you feel it again. That familiar weight pressing down on your chest. It's not quite sadness, not quite anger, but something more complex, more layered. It's the feeling of being trapped inside your own skin, suffocated by invisible chains that seem to tighten with each passing day. In these moments, you might think you want to disappear, to simply cease existing. But if you look deeper, past the immediate pain and exhaustion, you'll find something more nuanced. You don't actually want to die. What you want is to kill something within yourself that has been slowly poisoning your days and stealing your peace. This realization, when it first arrives, can be both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it forces you to confront the uncomfortable truth that the enemy you've been fighting isn't out there in the world. It's inside you, woven into the very fabric of who you think you are. Liberating because it means you have more power than you imagined. You can't always control what happens to you, but you can learn to identify and eliminate the internal patterns, beliefs, and behaviors that keep you trapped in cycles of suffering. The anatomy of inner destruction. What exactly is this thing within you that needs to die? It's rarely one simple element, but rather a complex ecosystem of interconnected patterns that have taken root in your psyche over years, sometimes decades. It might be the voice that tells you you're not good enough, the part of you that sabotages good things when they start to happen, or the aspect of your personality that keeps you stuck in relationships and situations that drain your life force. Sometimes it's the perfectionist who never allows you to rest, who measures your worth by impossible standards and leaves you exhausted from constantly trying to prove yourself. Other times, it's the victim mentality that has become so comfortable, so familiar, that you've forgotten what it feels like to take full responsibility for your life. It could be the people pleaser who has sacrificed so much of your authentic self that you no longer know who you really are beneath all the masks you wear. The thing that needs to die might be your addiction to drama, your need to be right all the time, or your habit of seeing the world through the lens of scarcity and fear. It could be the part of you that holds grudges like precious treasures, replaying old hurts until they become more real than the present moment. Perhaps it's the inner critic that has become so loud and persistent that its voice has become indistinguishable from your own thoughts. These internal patterns didn't develop overnight, and they didn't develop without reason. Many of them once served a purpose. They were survival mechanisms that helped you navigate difficult circumstances, cope with trauma, or gain love and acceptance in environments where these were scarce. The people pleaser developed because you learned that your needs didn't matter as much as keeping others happy. The perfectionist emerged because you discovered that being flawless was the only way to avoid criticism or abandonment. The victim mentality took hold because it provided a way to make sense of pain and perhaps gain sympathy or avoid responsibility when you felt too overwhelmed to cope. The protective prison. Understanding the origins of these patterns is crucial because it helps you approach them with compassion rather than hatred. The parts of you that need to die aren't evil. They're outdated protection systems that have outlived their usefulness. They're like security guards who are hired to protect you during dangerous time, but who now prevent you from leaving the building, even though the danger has passed. This is why the process of inner transformation can feel so threatening. These patterns have become integral to your sense of identity. The perfectionist doesn't just do perfect work, they are the person who does perfect work. The people pleaser doesn't just help others, they are the helpful person. When you begin to challenge these aspects of yourself, it can feel like you're not just changing behavior, you're destroying who you are. But here's what you need to understand. These patterns are not you. They are costumes you've been wearing for so long that you've forgotten they can be removed. They are roles you've been playing with such dedication that you've confused the character with the actor. The real you, the essential you, exists beneath all of these learned behaviors and defensive strategies. The real you is what remains when you strip away all the ways you've learned to be in order to survive, succeed, or be loved. The false self's grip. Psychologists sometimes refer to this collection of adaptive behaviors and defensive patterns as the false self, the version of you that developed to meet external demands and navigate a world that often felt unsafe or unwelcoming. The false self is incredibly sophisticated. It learns what works and what doesn't, what gets rewarded and what gets punished, and it adapts accordingly. It becomes expert at reading social cues, anticipating others' needs, and modifying your behavior to achieve desired outcomes. The problem is that the false self eventually becomes a prison. What started as flexibility becomes rigidity. What began as adaptation becomes compulsion. You find yourself unable to stop performing, unable to relax into authenticity, unable to simply be without constantly calculating how to be better, different, more acceptable. You might recognize this in the way you exhaust yourself trying to maintain an image that doesn't quite fit, or in the panic you feel when someone sees you without your carefully constructed mask. You might notice it in the way you've lost touch with your own preferences, your own desires, your own voice, because you've been so focused on being what others need or want you to be. The false self is clever. It convinces you that without it, you'll be rejected, abandoned, or fail completely. It whispers that your authentic self isn't good enough, that people won't love the real you, that you need all these protective strategies to make it in the world. It keeps you trapped by making you believe that these patterns are you, that changing them would mean losing yourself entirely. The courage to let die. Recognizing what needs to die within you requires tremendous courage because it means facing uncomfortable truths about how you've been living. It means acknowledging the ways you've been complicit in your own suffering, the ways you've chosen familiar pain over unknown freedom, the ways you've clung to victim status or martyrdom because it felt safer than taking full responsibility for your life. This recognition often comes in waves. You might have moments of clarity where you see exactly how a particular pattern has been limiting you, followed by periods where you forget entirely and slip back into old behaviors. You might feel angry at yourself for allowing these patterns to control you for so long, or frustrated that awareness alone doesn't seem to be enough to create change. The process of identifying what needs to die is like archaeological work. You have to dig through layers of conditioning, examining beliefs and behaviors that have become so automatic you barely notice them. You start to question why you do what you do, why you react the way you react, why certain situations trigger such intense responses in you. Sometimes the realization comes through contrast. You spend time with someone who doesn't operate from the same limiting patterns, and suddenly you can see your own more clearly. Sometimes it comes through exhaustion. You get so tired of the same cycles repeating that you become willing to look deeper. Sometimes it comes through crisis. Life circumstances force you to confront aspects of yourself you've been avoiding. The death that leads to life. The beautiful paradox is that as you begin to let these false aspects of yourself die, you don't become less, you become more. more authentic, more alive, more connected to your true desires and values. The energy that was tied up in maintaining facades becomes available for genuine growth and creativity. The mental space that was occupied by inner criticism becomes available for self-compassion and wisdom. This process rarely happens all at once. It's more like a series of small deaths and rebirths, moments where you catch yourself in an old pattern and choose differently. Times when you feel the pull of familiar behaviors but find the strength to resist. Each time you choose authenticity over performance, each time you choose self-compassion over self-criticism, each time you choose vulnerability over invulnerability, a small part of the false self dies and a small part of your true self is born. The dying process can be uncomfortable because these patterns often served important functions, even if they were ultimately limiting. When you stop people-pleasing, you might face conflict for the first time. When you stop perfectionism, you might have to tolerate the discomfort of good enough. When you stop playing the victim, you might have to take responsibility for changes you've been avoiding. But what emerges on the other side is remarkable. You start to experience what it feels like to be genuinely yourself in the world. You discover that people can love you without you having to earn it constantly. You find that you can handle conflict, imperfection, and responsibility better than you thought. You realize that your authentic self is far more resilient and capable than the carefully constructed false self ever was. The resistance to change. Your psyche will resist this process because change, even positive change, represents a kind of death to the parts of you that have been in control. The ego structure that has been running your life doesn't want to be dismantled, even if it's been making you miserable. It knows how to operate within the current system, and it fears the unknown territory of authenticity. This resistance can show up in many ways. You might find yourself procrastinating on changes you know would benefit you. You might sabotage progress just as things start to improve. You might find excuses to return to old patterns, telling yourself that this time it will be different, that you can make the dysfunction work if you just try harder. The resistance might come in the form of inner voices that sound reasonable and protective. Don't change too much too fast. What if people don't like the real you? You've survived this long with these patterns. Why rock the boat now? You're being selfish by putting your own needs first. These voices aren't necessarily wrong. Change does involve risk, but they often overestimate the dangers and underestimate your capacity to handle them. Sometimes the resistance is more subtle. You might intellectually understand what needs to change but find yourself unable to sustain new behaviors. You might have insights about your patterns but struggle to translate understanding into action. You might feel like you're going in circles, making the same realizations over and over without experiencing lasting transformation. This is normal and doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. Change at this level isn't just about modifying behavior, it's about rewiring neural pathways that have been strengthened by years of repetition. It's about developing new relationship patterns, new ways of thinking, new ways of being, that feel foreign at first because they are foreign. The grief of letting go. As you begin to let go of the patterns that no longer serve you, you might be surprised to find yourself grieving. This might seem strange. Why would you mourn the loss of something that was causing you pain? But grief is a natural response to any significant loss, even when that loss is ultimately beneficial. You might grieve for the version of yourself you thought you were, the identity you've carried for so long that it feels like a part of your body. You might mourn for the time you feel you've lost while trapped in limiting patterns, or for the opportunities you missed because you were too afraid to be authentic. You might feel sad for the younger version of yourself who developed these patterns out of necessity, who did the best they could with the tools they had. This grief is sacred and important. It honors the complexity of the human experience and acknowledges that growth isn't always joyful. Sometimes it's bittersweet. The patterns you're releasing served you at one time, and it's appropriate to feel some sadness as you outgrow them, just as you might feel nostalgic when you outgrow a favorite piece of clothing. Allowing yourself to feel this grief rather than rushing past it toward the promise of transformation is crucial. The grief contains wisdom about what these patterns meant to you, what needs they were trying to meet, and what you'll need to cultivate to fill the space they leave behind. If you don't grieve properly, you might find yourself unconsciously recreating similar patterns in new forms. The emergence of authentic self. As the false patterns begin to die, something remarkable starts to happen. Your authentic self begins to emerge. This isn't a self you need to create or construct, it's a self you need to uncover. It was there all along, buried beneath layers of conditioning and adaptation, waiting for the space to breathe and express itself. Your authentic self might feel strange at first, because it operates differently than your false self. Where the false self was reactive, your authentic self is responsive. Where the false self was driven by fear, your authentic self is motivated by love and curiosity. Where the false self was concerned with how things looked, your authentic self cares about how things feel and whether they align with your values. You might notice that your authentic self has different preferences than you thought you had. Maybe you discover you actually enjoy solitude more than constant social interaction, or that you're more creative than you realized, or that you have strong opinions about things you previously felt neutral about. You might find that relationships that felt draining before become energizing when you show up authentically, or that some relationships naturally fade as you stop playing the roles that maintained them. The emergence of your authentic self can be disorienting because it challenges many assumptions you've held about yourself and your life. You might realize you've been living someone else's dreams, following paths that looked right but felt wrong, or maintaining relationships that were based more on need than genuine connection. Navigating relationships during transformation. One of the most challenging aspects of letting your false self die is navigating how this affects your relationships. The people in your life have become accustomed to interacting with your patterns, and when you begin to change, it can create confusion, resistance, or conflict. If you've been a people pleaser, others might be confused or even upset when you start setting boundaries. If you've been the strong one who never shows vulnerability, people might not know how to respond when you start sharing your struggles. If you've been the one who always takes care of everyone else, others might resist when you start prioritizing your own needs. Some relationships will adjust and even improve as you become more authentic. People who truly care about you will appreciate getting to know the real you, even if it requires some adjustment. These relationships often become deeper and more satisfying, as they're based on genuine connection rather than role-playing. Other relationships might struggle or even end as you change. This can be painful, but it's important to remember that relationships built primarily on your false self weren't truly intimate anyway. If someone can only love you when you're performing a particular role, then they don't really love you. They love what you do for them or how you make them feel. The key is to approach these relationship changes with compassion for both yourself and others. People resist change, even positive change. because it disrupts familiar patterns and creates uncertainty. Give people time to adjust, but don't sacrifice your growth to maintain comfort for others. The practice of inner archaeology. The process of identifying and releasing what needs to die within you requires what might be called inner archaeology, the careful, patient work of excavating the layers of conditioning that have accumulated over your lifetime. This isn't a one-time event, but an ongoing practice of self-awareness and conscious choice. This archaeological work involves paying attention to your automatic reactions and asking yourself where they come from. When you feel triggered by something, instead of just reacting, you pause and investigate. What is this reaction really about? What old wound or fear is being activated? What pattern is trying to run the show? You start to notice the stories you tell yourself about what's happening and questioning whether they're true. Maybe you've been telling yourself that people can't be trusted, that you have to be perfect to be loved, or that conflict always leads to abandonment. These stories might have been true in certain contexts at certain times, but are they still serving you? Are they still accurate? The practice involves learning to observe your thoughts and emotions without immediately identifying with them. Instead of, "I am angry," you learn to notice anger is present. Instead of, "I am a failure," you recognize thoughts about failure are arising. This subtle shift creates space between you and your patterns, space where choice becomes possible. The role of self-compassion. Perhaps the most crucial element in this process of inner transformation is self-compassion. The parts of you that need to die won't respond well to hatred, criticism, or force. They develop to protect you, and they need to be honored for their service, even as you recognize that their time has passed. Self-compassion means treating yourself with the same kindness you would offer a good friend who was struggling. It means recognizing that having dysfunctional patterns doesn't make you broken or bad, it makes you human. Everyone develops coping mechanisms and defensive strategies. Everyone has parts of themselves that need to evolve and grow. When you catch yourself falling back into old patterns, self-compassion allows you to respond with curiosity rather than judgment. Isn't that interesting? I'm doing that thing again. I wonder what triggered it. This approach is far more effective than self-criticism, which only strengthens the very patterns you're trying to release. Self-compassion also means being patient with the process. Inner transformation doesn't happen on a timeline, and it's rarely linear. You might make progress in one area while struggling in another. You might have breakthrough moments followed by periods that feel like regression. This is normal and natural. Change is complex, and your psyche needs time to integrate new ways of being. The wisdom of gradual change. While there might be moments of dramatic insight or sudden shifts, most inner transformation happens gradually, through countless small choices and tiny course corrections. This gradual approach is actually wisdom. Your psyche knows that too much change too quickly can be destabilizing and potentially harmful. Think of it like renovating a house while you're still living in it. You can't tear down all the walls at once, or you'll have nowhere to live while the new structure is being built. Instead, you work on one room at a time, creating new spaces while maintaining enough of the old structure to keep functioning. This means being gentle with yourself when change feels slow or when you find yourself reverting to old patterns. Each moment of awareness, each small choice in a new direction, each time you catch yourself and choose differently, these all contribute to the larger transformation, even when you can't see the progress clearly. The gradual approach also allows you to test new ways of being in small, manageable doses. You can experiment with setting a small boundary and see how it feels, rather than completely overhauling all your relationships at once. You can practice self-compassion in low-stakes situations before applying it to your deepest wounds. Recognizing the signs of inner death and rebirth. As you engage in this process of inner transformation, you'll start to recognize the signs that old patterns are dying and new aspects of yourself are being born. These signs can be subtle at first, but they become more apparent as you learn to pay attention. One sign is a growing sense of ease in situations that used to feel difficult or triggering. You might notice that you're less reactive to criticism, less anxious about conflict, or less compulsive about pleasing others. The old patterns might still be present, but they don't have the same grip on you. They feel more like old habits you can choose to engage with or not. Another sign is an increased capacity for authenticity. You find yourself expressing opinions you previously kept hidden, showing emotions you used to suppress, or making choices based on your own values rather than what you think others expect. This authenticity feels both liberating and slightly scary. Liberating because it's a relief to stop performing, scary because it feels vulnerable. You might also notice that you're less interested in drama, whether creating it or participating in it. Situations that used to pull you in completely now feel less compelling. You have less need to be right, less investment in other people's approval, less attachment to outcomes you can't control. The integration phase. As old patterns die and new ways of being emerge, there's a crucial phase of integration where you learn to live from this new, more authentic place. This phase can be challenging because you're essentially learning to walk in a new way, speak in a new voice, relate in new patterns. During integration, you might feel uncertain about who you are. The old identity markers that used to define you no longer fit, but your new sense of self might still feel unfamiliar. This is normal and temporary. Identity is more fluid than we often realize, and it takes time for a new sense of self to feel solid and familiar. You might also find that your life circumstances need to change to accommodate your inner transformation. Jobs that once felt tolerable might become unbearable when you're operating from authenticity. Relationships that worked when you were playing a role might need to be renegotiated or released. Living situations that supported your old patterns might no longer feel appropriate. These external changes can be unsettling, but they're often necessary. Your outer life needs to align with your inner reality, or you'll experience constant friction. Trust that as you become more authentic, you'll naturally attract circumstances and relationships that support your true self. The ongoing journey. It's important to understand that this process of inner transformation isn't a destination you reach, but a journey you continue. There will always be new layers to uncover, new patterns to evolve, new aspects of yourself to integrate. This isn't a failure of the process, it's the nature of being human in a constantly changing world. As you grow and change, as life presents new challenges and opportunities, you'll need to continue examining what serves you and what needs to be released. The skills you develop in this initial process of major transformation, self-awareness, self-compassion, the ability to observe your patterns without being controlled by them, these become tools you use throughout your life. You might find that patterns you thought you'd completely resolved resurface during times of stress or transition. This doesn't mean you've failed or regressed. It means you're human. The patterns that once ruled your life might still appear occasionally, but your relationship with them has changed. You recognize them faster, you're not as identified with them, and you have more choice about whether to engage with them. The expanding circle of authenticity. As you do this work of inner transformation, you'll likely notice that the effects extend far beyond your personal experience. When you stop operating from false patterns and start living authentically, it gives others permission to do the same. Your willingness to be real makes space for others to drop their masks and facades. You might find that your relationships become more honest and intimate as you model vulnerability and authenticity. You might discover that your work becomes more meaningful as you bring your true self to what you do rather than just going through the motions. You might notice that you have more energy available for creativity, service, and joy because you're no longer using so much energy to maintain false patterns. The transformation is also likely to affect how you interact with suffering, both your own and others. When you've done the work of identifying and releasing your own limiting patterns, you become more compassionate toward others who are struggling with theirs. You can recognize the false self in others without judgment, understanding that they too are doing the best they can with the tools they have. Embracing the unknown. Perhaps one of the most challenging aspects of this journey is learning to embrace the unknown. Your false patterns, however limiting they were, provided a sense of certainty and predictability. You knew how to operate within them, even if the operation caused you pain. Releasing them means stepping into uncertainty, not knowing exactly who you'll be on the other side. This uncertainty can trigger anxiety because humans generally prefer the known, even when the known is uncomfortable, to the unknown, even when the unknown might be wonderful. Your mind might create catastrophic scenarios about what will happen if you change, or it might romanticize the past and make you want to return to old patterns. Learning to tolerate and even embrace uncertainty is a crucial skill in this process. It means trusting that you have the capacity to handle whatever emerges, that you can figure things out as you go, that you don't need to have everything mapped out in advance. It means trusting in your own resilience and adaptability. The unknown is also where all possibility lives. When you're locked into rigid patterns, your life becomes predictable but limited. When you open to the unknown, you open to potential you never imagined. The person you become on the other side of this transformation might be someone you never could have planned to be, but who is more authentically you than you've ever been. The gift of inner freedom. What emerges from this process of inner death and rebirth is a profound sense of inner freedom. This isn't the freedom to do whatever you want without consequences. That's just another form of unconsciousness. This is the freedom to choose your responses, to live from your values, to be authentic in a world that often rewards conformity. Inner freedom means you're no longer enslaved by your past, your conditioning, or other people's expectations. You can honor your history without being imprisoned by it. You can learn from your patterns without being controlled by them. You can care about others' opinions without being dominated by them. This freedom brings with it a different kind of responsibility. The responsibility to live consciously, to choose deliberately, to respond rather than react. When you're no longer operating on autopilot, you become responsible for your choices in a deeper way. This can feel daunting at first, but it ultimately leads to a more empowered and satisfying life. Living from your center. As the false patterns die and your authentic self emerges, you begin to experience what it means to live from your center, that place within you that remains constant regardless of external circumstances. Your center is where your values live, where your deepest wisdom resides, where your capacity for love and compassion originates. Living from your center doesn't mean you never feel disturbed or challenged by life. It means that even when you're thrown off balance, you know how to find your way back to yourself. You have an internal reference point that doesn't depend on others' approval, external achievements, or perfect circumstances. From this centered place, you can engage with life more fully because you're not constantly defending yourself or maintaining false images. You can be present to what's actually happening rather than filtering everything through old patterns and fears. You can respond to situations from a place of choice rather than compulsion. The courage to continue. This journey of inner transformation requires immense courage, not just the courage to begin, but the courage to continue when the process becomes difficult, messy, or unclear. There will be moments when you question whether the discomfort of change is worth it, when you wonder if you should just go back to the familiar patterns that at least provided some sense of security. In these moments, remember that you don't actually want to die. You want to kill what's dead within you so that what's alive can flourish. The discomfort you feel isn't a sign that you're going in the wrong direction. It's often a sign that you're exactly where you need to be, in the space between the old way and the new way, in the fertile darkness where transformation happens. The courage to continue comes partly from remembering why you started this journey in the first place. What was it about your old way of being that became unbearable? What vision of yourself, however vague, called you toward change? That initial impulse toward transformation is sacred. It's your deeper wisdom recognizing that you're capable of so much more than your patterns would have you believe. The death that gives life. You don't want to die, but you do want to kill what's within you that prevents you from truly living. This distinction is everything. It's the difference between despair and hope, between giving up and growing up, between remaining trapped and becoming free. The parts of you that need to die, the false patterns, the limiting beliefs, the defensive strategies that have outlived their usefulness, these aren't your enemies. They're old friends who served you well in their time, but who now need to be thanked and released so that you can continue growing. This process of inner death and rebirth isn't something you do once and finish. It's a way of living that honors the constant evolution of human consciousness. It's a commitment to staying awake to your patterns, choosing growth over comfort, authenticity over approval, love over fear. As you engage in this sacred work, remember that you're not just transforming yourself, you're contributing to the transformation of the world. Every person who does the work of releasing false patterns and living authentically makes it easier for others to do the same. Your healing becomes a gift, not just to yourself, but to everyone whose life you touch. The death of what no longer serves you makes space for what wants to be born through you. In this death, you don't lose yourself, you find yourself. In this ending, you don't reach a conclusion, you discover a beginning. In this letting go, you don't empty yourself. You make room for more life, more love, more of who you truly are. This is the paradox at the heart of all growth. Sometimes we must die to truly live, not the death of the body, but the death of everything that keeps us from embodying our fullest, most authentic selves. In this dying, we are born. In their release, we are freed. In this ending, we find our true beginning. The sacred space between. There exists a sacred space between who you were and who you are becoming, a liminal threshold where transformation occurs. This space can feel uncomfortable because you're no longer fully anchored in your old identity, yet your new self hasn't fully crystallized. You might feel like you're floating in an undefined space, unsure of your ground, questioning everything you once took for granted about yourself. This in-between space is where the real work happens. It's where you learn to sit with uncertainty, to trust the process even when you can't see the outcome, to have faith in your own capacity for growth. The discomfort you feel here isn't a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that something profound is shifting within you. In this space, you might experience what feels like an identity crisis. The roles you've played, the stories you've told about yourself, the ways you've organized your sense of self, all of these become fluid and questionable. Who are you if you're not the perfectionist, the people pleaser, the strong one, the victim? Who are you beneath all the ways you've learned to be? This questioning, though unsettling, is actually a sign of health. It means you're no longer unconsciously identified with patterns that don't serve you. It means you're developing the capacity to observe your own conditioning rather than being blindly driven by it. This is the beginning of real freedom, the freedom to choose who you want to be rather than simply reacting from old programming. The wisdom of your body. Your body holds profound wisdom about this process of inner transformation. It knows the difference between patterns that serve life and patterns that diminish it. When you're operating from authentic alignment, your body feels expansive, energized, and at ease. When you're caught in false patterns, your body contracts, tenses, and signals distress. Learning to listen to your body's wisdom becomes crucial in this journey. Your physical sensations can guide you toward what wants to live and away from what needs to die. That tightness in your chest when you're about to say yes to something you don't want to do, that sense of expansion when you express a truth you've been hiding, that feeling of depletion when you're performing rather than being, these are all valuable pieces of information. Your body doesn't lie the way your mind can. It can't rationalize unhealthy patterns or convince itself that dysfunction is normal. When you tune into your bodily experience, you access a deeper intelligence that knows what serves your highest good and what keeps you trapped in limitation. This embodied awareness also helps you recognize when old patterns are trying to reassert themselves. Your body will often signal the activation of these patterns before your mind becomes consciously aware of them. That familiar tension pattern, that particular way your breath changes, that specific sensation in your stomach, these become early warning signals that allow you to choose a different response. The community of transformation. While this inner work is ultimately something you must do yourself, it doesn't have to be done alone. Finding others who are engaged in similar processes of growth and transformation can provide invaluable support, perspective, and encouragement. When you're surrounded by people who understand the challenges and rewards of authentic living, it becomes easier to stay committed to your own journey. This community might include therapists, spiritual teachers, support groups, or simply friends who are also committed to personal growth. The key is finding people who can see and support your authentic self rather than your familiar patterns. These are people who won't collude with your dysfunction or enable your old ways of being, but who will lovingly challenge you to keep growing. Being part of such a community also allows you to witness others' transformation, which can be deeply inspiring and instructive. You see that change is possible, that people can break free from limiting patterns, that authenticity is achievable. You also learn that everyone's journey is unique while sharing common themes and challenges. Moreover, engaging in community around transformation helps prevent the spiritual narcissism that can sometimes accompany inner work, the tendency to become so focused on your own process that you lose sight of your connection to others. True transformation always includes expanding your capacity for love, service, and genuine relationship. The shadow of transformation. As you embark on this journey of killing what no longer serves you, you'll inevitably encounter what psychologists call the shadow. Those aspects of yourself that you've rejected, denied, or pushed into unconsciousness. These aren't necessarily evil parts of you, but rather qualities or impulses that didn't fit with your self-image, or that you learned were unacceptable in your family or culture. Your shadow might contain your anger if you learned that nice people don't get mad, your ambition if you were taught that wanting success is selfish, your sexuality if you grew up in an environment where such desires were shameful, or your need for recognition if you were praised for being humble and self-effacing. The shadow can also hold your power if you learned that being strong threatened others, your joy if you were surrounded by suffering, or your creativity if you were told that art wasn't practical. The paradox is that what you've rejected in yourself often contains exactly the energy you need for authentic transformation. Your anger might hold the passion needed to set boundaries and stand up for yourself. Your ambition might contain the drive necessary to create the life you truly want. Your need for recognition might reflect a healthy desire to be seen and valued for who you really are. Integrating your shadow doesn't mean acting out every impulse or becoming someone you're not. It means acknowledging these rejected parts of yourself with compassion and finding healthy ways to express their underlying energy. When you stop using so much energy to suppress aspects of yourself, that energy becomes available for growth and creativity. The shadow integration process often involves recognizing these qualities in others first. If you find yourself strongly triggered by someone's arrogance, it might be because you've rejected your own healthy pride. If someone's emotional expression makes you deeply uncomfortable, you might be encountering your own repressed feelings. The people who trigger you most intensely often mirror back the very qualities you need to reclaim in yourself. This doesn't mean that every negative reaction reveals a shadow aspect. Sometimes people genuinely behave in harmful ways that warrant a strong response. But when your reaction seems disproportionate to the situation, or when you find yourself repeatedly triggered by the same quality in different people, it's worth examining what this might reveal about your own disowned parts. Working with your shadow requires tremendous honesty and courage because it means admitting that you're more complex than you've allowed yourself to be. It means acknowledging that you contain multitudes, not just the acceptable, spiritual, evolved parts, but also the messy, human, contradictory aspects that make you whole. This integration is essential for authentic transformation because you can't become truly yourself while rejecting significant parts of who you are. The shadow work also reveals the ways you've been unconsciously projecting your disowned qualities onto others. When you reclaim these projections, your relationships become more honest and realistic. You stop expecting others to carry the parts of yourself you've rejected, and you stop demonizing people for expressing qualities that you secretly possess. As you integrate your shadow, you might discover that some of the qualities you've spent years trying to eliminate aren't actually problems to be solved, but gifts to be understood and channeled appropriately. Your sensitivity, which you might have seen as weakness, could be the source of your intuition and empathy. Your intensity, which others might have labeled as too much, could be the fire that fuels your passion and creativity. This integration process often involves grieving for the parts of yourself you've rejected or abandoned. You might feel sad for the years you spent trying to be someone you're not, or angry about the messages you received that certain aspects of yourself were unacceptable. This grief is healing. It honors the fullness of who you are and creates space for a more complete self-acceptance. The shadow work also reveals the exhaustion that comes from constant self-rejection. When you're always trying to be good, acceptable, and appropriate, You use enormous amounts of energy maintaining your image and suppressing your authentic responses. As you begin to accept your complexity, you discover a new kind of energy, the vitality that comes from being whole rather than partial, integrated rather than fragmented. Understanding your shadow also helps you recognize when you're projecting your own transformation journey onto others. Sometimes, in your enthusiasm for growth, you might unconsciously try to fix or change people around you, seeing their patterns clearly while being blind to your own. Recognizing this tendency helps you focus your energy where it can actually make a difference, on your own continued evolution, while allowing others the space to find their own path to authenticity. The alchemy of pain into purpose. One of the most profound aspects of this inner transformation is how the very pain that once felt like it might destroy you becomes the raw material for your greatest gifts. The wounds you've carried, the struggles you've endured, the patterns you've had to overcome, these don't simply disappear when you do the work of inner healing. Instead, they undergo a kind of alchemical transformation, becoming sources of wisdom, compassion, and service. Your deepest wounds often point toward your greatest purposes. The person who struggled with addiction might become a guide for others seeking recovery. The one who battled depression might develop an extraordinary capacity for holding space for others' darkness. The individual who overcame people-pleasing might become a teacher of healthy boundaries. Your pain, when fully processed and integrated, becomes a bridge of understanding between your past suffering and others' current struggles. This doesn't mean you should be grateful for trauma or minimize the reality of your pain. It means that once you've done the work of healing, once you've killed the patterns that kept you trapped in victim consciousness, you can begin to see how your experiences have uniquely qualified you to serve in ways that someone who hasn't walked your path simply couldn't. The transformation of pain into purpose requires that you first fully own your story. You must be willing to look honestly at what happened to you, how it affected you, and how you've been unconsciously recreating those patterns in your life. You must grieve what was lost, feel the anger that was suppressed, and acknowledge the ways you've been complicit in your own suffering. Only after this honest reckoning can the alchemy begin. As you move through this process, you start to see your pain differently. Instead of something that happened to you, it becomes something that prepared you. Instead of evidence of your brokenness, it becomes proof of your resilience. Instead of a source of shame, it becomes a source of strength and authenticity. This shift from victim to victor to servant is perhaps the most profound transformation possible. When you can help others navigate struggles you've overcome, when you can offer hope to those who are where you once were, when you can use your hard-won wisdom to ease someone else's path, this is when your pain finds its highest purpose. The alchemy doesn't happen automatically. It requires consciousness, intention, and often significant time. You can't bypass the healing process and jump straight to service, because unhealed wounds create helpers who are more invested in their own need to be needed than in others' actual well-being. But when you've done the work, when you've faced your shadows and integrated your pain, you become capable of a different kind of service, one that comes from overflow rather than emptiness, from wisdom rather than wound. This purposeful use of your pain also creates a different relationship with future challenges. Instead of seeing difficulties as punishments or evidence that you're doing something wrong, you begin to understand them as opportunities for continued growth and expanded capacity to serve. You develop trust in your ability to transform whatever life brings you into something meaningful and helpful.